I want you to imagine something for a second. It's December 16th, 1944. You're a German soldier deep in the Ardennes forest. You're part of a massive secret offensive, Hitler's last great gamble, and it's actually working. The attack is going perfectly. And then you hear it, the familiar whistle of American artillery. But something is wrong, terribly wrong. The shells aren't thudding into the snow-covered ground around you. They're exploding in the air, above you. A perfect, inescapable curtain of steel is raining down. There's nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Your foxhole is useless. This isn't just artillery. This is something entirely new, something terrifying. So what in the world was happening there? What were those soldiers facing? Well, this was the battlefield debut of a weapon so secret it was classified on the same level as the atomic bomb. This wasn't just a new gun or a bigger shell. This was a fundamental shift in warfare. And in the frozen forests of the Ardennes, it was about to change everything. You see, for any combat veteran, there are rules to survival. You learn the sounds, the rhythms of the battlefield. You know that when you hear incoming artillery, you dive into a ditch, a foxhole, you hug the earth. The ground is your shield. But this new weapon, it didn't just break the rules, it completely erased them. It was designed to detonate at the most lethal possible height, showering shrapnel downwards, making traditional cover completely obsolete. Imagine, everything you've ever learned to stay alive suddenly becomes worthless. So you can just imagine the question ripping through the German lines, born of pure absolute shock. What is this? How could the Americans possibly be doing this, especially in the thick fog and heavy snow of the Ardennes where you can't see a thing? To the soldiers on the ground, it seemed like dark magic, like something out of science fiction. But the reality wasn't magic. It was a technological leap so profound, it had been guarded as one of the most vital secrets of the entire war. All right, so we've set the stage, we've got this terrifying mystery on the battlefield. Now, let's pull back the curtain. The answer was hidden in plain sight, packed right into the nose of an otherwise ordinary-looking artillery shell. This was the birth of the smart weapon. It was called the proximity fuse, and honestly, that name is a massive understatement of its genius. This was not a simple timer. This was a complete miniature radar set, a transmitter, a receiver, an amplifier, a battery, all packed into a space the size of your fist. In essence, it was a weapon that could see. It could see the ground approaching, and then decide for itself the absolute perfect moment to detonate for maximum devastation. Let's just ride along with one of these shells for a second, because the elegance of the design is just brilliant. First, it's fired from the cannon. The incredible force of that launch shatters a tiny glass vial inside the fuse, which creates a wet cell battery that powers the whole system up. As the shell screams through the air, the tiny radar starts sending out radio waves. When those waves start bouncing back from the ground, or a tank, or a group of soldiers, with enough strength, a tiny electronic switch is triggered, and boom, a perfect airburst every single time. Simple in concept, but an absolute engineering nightmare to actually build. And this is where it gets truly mind-blowing. Look at that number, 20,000 Gs. Let's try to wrap our heads around that. That is a force so violent it would crush a human being into a microscopic smear. And yet the delicate electronics inside, tiny glass vacuum tubes, the fragile ancestors of today's transistors, had to withstand that initial shock, survive spinning at 25,000 RPM, and then work flawlessly. It was an engineering problem so difficult that many of the best minds in the world thought it was simply impossible. And the effort to solve it was immense. This was not some small project. It cost $1 billion in 1940s money, second only to the atom bomb. It sucked in a brain trust of top scientists. We're talking 3% of all American physicists were working on this. It involved over 100 different companies, from giants like RCA and General Electric to household names like Crossley Radio, all tasked with figuring out how to mass produce this impossible little device. And they did. By 1944, American factories were churning out 40,000 of these technological marvels every single day. But here is the incredible twist in the story. You have this war-winning weapon, and it's sitting in locked crates, forbidden from being used on land in Europe. The High Command was terrified that if the Germans captured even one unexploded shell, they might copy the technology. So the weapon that could save them was the one weapon they weren't allowed to use. It was going to take one man, in a moment of absolute desperation, to break that rule and change the course of the battle. Let's go back to that first chaotic morning of the Bulge. Colonel Oscar Axelson is watching his position get completely swamped by the German advance. He knows his conventional artillery isn't slowing them down. He also knows he has crates of these new top-secret shells with explicit orders from the highest levels of command: do not use them. So he has a choice: follow orders and watch his men get overrun, or risk a court-martial, maybe even prison, and give them a fighting chance. He chose his men. He got on the radio and gave the order: load the funny fuses. And the result was instantaneous. The German attack in his sector didn't just slow down, it vaporized. It just stopped. Word of this miraculous outcome rocketed up the chain of command. You have to imagine the reports hitting General Eisenhower's desk. "Sir, something just happened in Axelson's sector. The attack, it's just gone." Within 3 days, a desperate Eisenhower saw the results and requested immediate authorization for front-wide use. Just 5 days after Colonel Axelson's gamble, the green light was given. The secret was out. So, the gamble paid off. The secret's out, and now the gloves come off. So let's look at what actually happened when this weapon was fully unleashed across the front. What started as one colonel's desperate act was about to become the Allies' decisive trump card in the Battle of the Bulge. General George S. Patton saw it with his own eyes, and Patton was not a man who was easily impressed. He watched as a German infantry battalion was caught trying to cross the Saw River. Under normal conditions, in the darkness and fog, they would have been relatively safe, but the proximity fuses didn't need to see. Patton, not a man known for overstatement, was absolutely stunned. He wrote in his diary that after the barrage, they went and counted 702 German bodies. An entire military unit, just gone. And this table really shows you why. It wasn't just a little better, it was a revolution. Post-war analysis confirmed the fuse made a single artillery shell up to 50 times more lethal against troops in the open. 50 times. It meant one gun crew can now do the work of an entire battalion of artillery from a week earlier. It didn't need perfect aim. It didn't care about fog or snow or the middle of the night, conditions that had previously grounded the Allies' powerful air support. Now the artillery owned the battlefield, 24/7. And here's the truly terrifying part. It turned the battlefield itself into a weapon. For centuries, for millennia, forests have been a soldier's friend. They provide cover, concealment, safety. The Germans were masters of using the dense Ardennes forest to their advantage. But with the proximity fuse, a shell exploding over the trees created a storm of wooden shrapnel, showering down lethal splinters. The very thing that was supposed to protect them became a weapon aimed right at them. The Germans' greatest advantage became their single biggest liability. Now, you don't have to take my word for it. After the war, let's hear from the man who was in charge of the entire German offensive, Field Marshal von Rundstedt. When he was asked what defeated his army in the Ardennes, his answer was direct. He credited the incredible bravery of the American soldiers, absolutely, but then he added that his attacks were ultimately broken by artillery that seemed to have eyes. The enemy commander himself admitted that this one piece of technology was decisive. So, this is a fascinating piece of history, no doubt. But here's where we really connect the dots back to our world. Because the story of the proximity fuse isn't just about World War II. It's the origin story. It is the birth announcement for the entire age of smart warfare that we live in right now. And you want to hear the absolute craziest epilogue to this whole story? The Germans actually captured a stockpile of 20,000 of these fuses. 20,000. This should have been the intelligence coup of the war. But when their own top experts analyzed them, they concluded the technology was impossible. A hoax, a decoy. They were so convinced of their own scientific superiority that they literally could not believe the Allies had solved the engineering problems that they themselves had given up on. It's a chilling lesson in how institutional arrogance can blind you to a revolution that's happening right in front of your face. And you can draw a direct, unbroken line from that first thinking shell in 1944. That core concept, a weapon that can sense its environment and make a decision, that was the seed. From there, you get the first guided missiles of the Cold War, then the GPS-guided smart bombs that defined warfare in the 90s, all the way to the autonomous drones and AI-driven weapon systems that dominate today's headlines. They are all the direct descendants of the funny fuse. And just to really grasp the sheer scale of this thing, look at that final number, 22 million. That's how many of these complex miniature radar sets were produced. It's a powerful reminder that a brilliant invention is one thing, but having the industrial power to produce it on a war-winning scale, that's something else entirely. It was a scientific miracle, yes, but it was also an industrial one. So we come full circle.
The proximity fuse was the first weapon to take a tiny, but incredibly profound step towards autonomy. It was the first weapon that could think for itself. Today, 80 years later, we are on the verge of weapons that don't just sense proximity, but can use artificial intelligence to identify targets and make lethal decisions entirely on their own. And that forces us to grapple with a critical question, a question that really started in that frozen forest all those years ago. As this revolution continues, what happens when our weapons become even smarter?